Are you ready to take bold action and live a life of brilliance? Welcome to the Bold and Brilliant podcast, where women leaders share inspiring stories about daring decisions that shape their businesses, their lives, and their careers. Today, I'm with the fabulous and amazing Elisabeth Stitt. At Joyful Parenting Coaching, Elisabeth helps families move from chaos and conflict to clarity, connection, and calm. With over 25 years of hands-on experience with kids and families, Elisabeth offers parents the tools, mindsets, and compassionate guidance to create joyful, harmonious homes. She empowers parents to lead with purpose, grounded in their values, aligned with their long-term vision, and confident in their daily choices so that both kids and parents thrive. Through her signature blend of wisdom, warmth, and playfulness, Elisabeth supports families in becoming safe harbors where everyone can grow, feel seen, and live with love, laughter, and integrity. As we talk, you'll hear Elisabeth share her journey of entrepreneurship, including one bold decision that has created her path of what was next. Her story of resilience, risk-taking, and transformation will inspire, encourage, and support your personal and professional growth. Please join me in welcoming Elisabeth to the Bold and Brilliant podcast. Elisabeth, I am so excited to have you here on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. Happy.
Happy. I know, we spend a lot of time together. I think we're both very lucky that way. And it's always a joy, right? And that really goes back to like, you are who you say you are with Joyful Parenting Coaching. Like, being with you is a joy. You are full of joy. You exude joy. And so I wanted to acknowledge you for that because I'm excited to talk to you because it brings me joy. So thank you for that. And I wish we could hug and twirl, but today we're just going to be here on Zoom and love each other from afar. Okay. So Joyful Parenting Coaching obviously is where you are now, but we've been lots of places in our lives. So tell us how you became this child full of joy to become this adult full of joy to bring joy to others. So, where did you start? What did you do before coaching? Give us a little bit of your origin story. I know it can be extensive. So
The thing that I've been super lucky about is that I have always been focused on children. And my mother tells the stories of, my tender care of my baby dolls. And as soon as at Sunday school, as soon as we were old enough to walk to Sunday school class ourselves instead of being brought there by an adult, I would walk right by my Sunday school class and go on to the nursery and hang out with the 2-year-olds. And for whatever reason, the parents who were in charge of the nursery never sent me to my Sunday school class.
They probably loved having your support with the babies.
They probably did. They probably did. And so, even from the time that I was hardly, more than a baby myself, I was engaging with kids who were younger than I. I had no friends in elementary school. Second grade, I would spend my recesses in the kindergarten, helping to support the kindergartners. And by fourth grade, I was a mother's helper. She was an artist, stay-at-home artist, whose studio was right off the kitchen. So my number one mission was to keep the kids happy enough so that they didn't go and bang on her door. And I got very good at that. And then I became her regular babysitter. She was part of a co-op. And, so by sixth grade, I was babysitting for her every week and then for all kinds of families all over the place. And
you're kind of your own personal babysitters club starting.
I was kind of my own personal babysitters club. Yes. And it's funny because I'm trying to remember, how did strangers find me? in those days, but they did. And so, I would go all over town and babysit. And in high school, I had a job as there was a girl with Down syndromes, and she just needed extra support and practice in her physicality and in using her body. And so we would go and we would play and we would balance beam on, things on edges of things, and we would practice with balls and, again, just interacting with her in a way that was positive. In ninth grade, when we all had to write research papers and we were learning how to write them so we could write them on whatever we wrote, I wrote how to be an effective parent. And I so wish that I still had that paper,
I do
because
too.
I can imagine how officious I was at 14, how to be an effective parent.
I wonder if your English teacher, if it was English class, if your teacher was a parent.
My English teacher, Lee Clemens, was in my ballet class, and he was gay. He was not a parent. But so we had a very talky relationship, because we would talk at ballet as well as talk in class. And on the one hand, I think, well, who did I think I was to write a paper on how to be an effective parent? And on the other hand, when we think about Gladstone's 50,000 hours, 10,000 hours, right? And we think, well, by the time I got to ninth grade, I hadn't spent 10,000 hours, but I'd spent a lot of hours.
Mm-hmm.
And
And the
then,
majority of your hours, right?
yeah,
Percentage wise of the hours that you have existed was
well,
working.
it's definitely a lot of my free time hours. Yeah.
Mhm.
I started as a camp counselor the summer after I graduated from high school, and was a camp counselor for 6 summers. I did not go to Wheaton College in Massachusetts with the intention of being a teacher. I signed up for Psycho 101. I thought maybe I'd be a counselor or therapist of some
Mhm.
kind. An education teacher spoke at freshman orientation, and she was so riveting and so dynamic that even though she was speaking about women's role in history and not anything about education, I was like, I have to take a class with her. And so I went to the registrar's office and I dropped Psych 101 and I took the first education class. And that was really it. That was sort of a natural path. And
I think it's interesting that you had spent all of this time and had written about how to be, well, I guess, an effective parent. You weren't really thinking teaching, you were thinking parenting even at a young age, but that you didn't make that initial connection that teaching would be the way to go so that you could continue to spend time with as many kids as possible.
well, my guess is that I probably thought that teaching was more about the curriculum than necessarily the kids.
Yeah.
And in fact, when I left teaching, one of the reasons I left teaching was because I was bored with teaching comma splices and how to correct them. And
Yeah.
really, I was more and more focused on interacting with, in this case, middle schoolers, and saying, who are you? How can we apply the literature that we're reading? How can we use the literature we are reading to ask the question, who am I? Who do I want to be?
Mm.
Do I want to be Atticus Finch? Do I want to be, the good, the bad, the ugly?
Yeah, I love that. I love that. My kids are teenagers, older teenagers now, as you well know, but other people might not know this. And I think about when they were in middle school and the things that they were reading and reading The Outsiders and reading like all of these really standard, every middle schooler goes through kind of this list of books. Although my oldest was such a prolific reader, I think he read the whole library at that age. So I love that perspective from the teacher. And it kind of shows, what it's showing me is that, yeah, you went into education, but that desire to really get to know the kids and support the kids as humans never left from when you thought you wanted to be a counselor,
Yes.
right? Like you did have that kind of counseling ilk. Is that the right word? I don't know. Even though you ended up in that teaching.
Yes,
And I'm not
exactly.
surprised that the curriculum ultimately was the thing that kind of got to be the boring part, that you're doing the
Yeah.
same thing over and over And while the kids are different, that was always the same. So,
And the last 3 years I was teaching, we had a job on campus called the outreach teacher, which was half funded by the school district and half funded. It wasn't even a full-time job. It was half funded by the school district, half funded by the parent club.
mhm,
And it was essentially being school counselor. And when the woman who had been doing the job for years decided to retire, I was like, oh, okay. So I was like, I've got to talk to my principal. And I thought, I walked out at recess and I up to her, says, I have to talk to you. She says, I have to talk to you. And we turned to each other. I'm like, I want that job. She's like, you need that, you're the person for that job.
yeah,
And so it was just one of those, all the work that I had been doing sort of auxiliary to the classroom. I had created the character education program. I had created a study skills program. I had created a sort of, we'd started the happiness club. I was the advisor to the junior optimists whose mission was to improve the lives of children in San Mateo County.
love it.
And so, all these pieces were there, they were lined up and they were coming together. And I did anticipate, or I did think, I had thought kind of for a long time that I would want to go back and do an MFT. And when I
Mm-hmm.
actually looked at the nitty-gritty of how much work it would be, and ironically, because I didn't even take Psych 101, I would have had a lot of extra psych classes that I had to take to even get up,
Yeah.
to the next level. And then the real killer is, in California at least, it's 3,000 supervised hours before you can go off and do something yourself. And so I was really like a little bit in a slump and like, what am I going to do? I don't know about this. And then my sister invited me on a women's retreat who was run by a life coach. I'd never heard of a life coach.
When was this? Do you
This
remember the
was
year?
like 20, I don't know, 2012, 2013, something in there.
Okay.
And she said the golden words, which is that coaching in the United States is unregulated, right? You could be coach of anything if people will pay you for it.
Right.
And that was just like a big click moment of like, oh, I could do the work that I want to do without
Spending 3 years in education
right,
there.
right. And I knew that I didn't want to do deep psychological work.
Yeah.
Right. I'm a very like nuts and bolts, grounded, practical kind of person. And what I was seeing in the parents of my students was that they no longer had those kinds of nuts and bolts parenting skills.
Mm.
And they didn't need deep psychological counseling. I mean, some might, yeah, of course. But, a lot of them just needed the education and the support and the guidance and the accountability that generations prior, parents maybe got by sitting down with coffee with a girlfriend and sharing, or standing around at a barbecue on Saturday night when we weren't slumped on our couches watching Netflix.
Well, so we've already kind of turned this corner. So I'm going to interrupt you just to say, the thing that I want all of our guests here on the podcast to talk about is the bold decision that they made that changed everything for them. We've already kind of gotten there by talking about coaching versus being a therapist versus teaching and all of these things. And so, and I don't know that I remember hearing the whole thing about that. I want to say I don't remember the name, the resource teacher.
Oh, being a resource teacher?
Yeah, which honestly, my youngest went to the resource teacher at his school every week for a year and a half, and it was life-changing for him. Very, very supportive. So I'm really glad that you did that because I can see you in that role, like based on his experience. And so the change from deciding to leave teaching, it was more natural than I had anticipated before, because you went from being a classroom teacher to a different kind of teacher and then leaving teaching generally. So that makes a lot more sense to me now than in any of our previous conversations. So thank you.
Yeah, it definitely gave me some practice. So, right, the difference between being a classroom teacher where mostly you're interacting with parents on a parent student teacher conference, and you're going boom, 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 because the next person is already standing outside the door,
Yep.
right? You've been the parent wanting to talk still, but feeling the pressure of,
Yep. But our time is up.
and so we can't have very, deep or complex conversations. And it was one of the purposes of this job was to not have a lot on the list of what was I having to do, so that I might just be sitting in my office with an empty office when a parent walked in, so that the office manager could say, no, the principal isn't available. Why don't you check and see if Mrs. Stitt is in her office? And then if I was, they could come in. And so for the first time, I was doing that coaching piece really without even knowing, what I was doing, because, you would come in and everybody comes in with a little tip of the iceberg of the school problem, like, oh, it's a school issue. This is why I'm here.
Mm.
And it wasn't my job really to solve problems. So it was really my job to just say, well, okay, Tracie, tell me more about that. And what else is going on? And what else? And what's going on at home? And how about the other activities? And what, and so bit by bit, question by question, getting more of the base of the iceberg.
Yeah. Well, and I love that worked. The thing that comes to my mind is like they come in to talk to the principal because it's a school problem, but ultimately it literally has nothing to do with the principal. Like that's
Often.
the figurehead of the organization at large, of the facility, right? But really what they needed was to talk to you, to someone who had some inkling of what was actually happening from a behavior standpoint, from an experience standpoint out in the school, where the principal has a very different job to manage the school, not
Yeah.
necessarily the kids. I mean, they're I'm not trying to
No,
negate their effectiveness with the kids
principals are
too, but
wonderful and they wear so many hats.
yeah.
They don't ever have 45 minutes to just sort of say, tell me more.
Well, and as the top of a large organization, a lot, you have certain jobs that are yours and certain jobs that are delegated, just like any company. It's a division of a company, right? So the principal has to be like, okay, well, this thing is something that is important for me to spend a lot of time on or a little time on, and this other person really could be more effective. And
Exactly.
that's where you were, is to be the effective one. And they needed you anyway, ultimately, instead of the principal.
Right.
Yeah.
But there still was a big moment. It still was a leap.
Yeah. So talk about like deciding the leap from classroom to the resource teacher, but then you decided to start coaching and literally leave the school, which just like from an environment, a day to day, I'm working for myself. Talk about that
Well, and
decision
first
to
of all,
leave.
Tracie, I have to say that, yeah, I was doing the resource teaching job. I was still part-time in the classroom. I was doing 2 sections a day in the classroom at this perfect school, academic magnet school,
Mm,
great, super involved, quirky kids, lots of flexibility about what we're what we're teaching and how we're teaching. This was a perfect job. And I, I probably could have just stayed the other 10 years and then I would be retiring at about now from teaching. And, having put in the years, the full retirement years in the school district. So it's not like people are going like, oh, my job, I can't stand it.
right.
No, like I really did love my job. And with the resource piece, I was getting enough other stuff that wasn't comma splices that I think I could have come through the 10 years with enough passion and energy and commitment to show up for my kids every day as if it were my first year teaching,
Mm-hmm.
but with all the experience and wisdom that you
Right.
gain in all those years.
Well, because we've
Uh,
all, as parents, a lot of us have experienced the teacher who, like, they aren't happy anymore and they weren't
yeah,
haven't been happy for years.
yes,
And why are they still here? And
yeah.
you could have not had that issue.
I could have not had that issue. And I was also very clear. I had made a promise to myself. It is unfair it is unfair to your students.
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing to be inexperienced. You can't help that. And the only thing you can do is to teach more and get more experience, right? It's, you are not the full teacher when you're in your first couple of years of teaching that you're going to be later. There's no doubt about that. But to not bow out and to step away when you're not showing up 100%,
Yep.
that to me is I get it from a financial point of view. It's too bad that the system is kind of like that, but to me it really is unconscionable, and I just promised myself that I would never do it.
Yeah.
I wasn't there though. So it was still more like having listened to these parents as the outreach teacher and hearing like levels of overwhelm and anxiety and guilt. Oh my gosh, the levels of guilt that parents were feeling. And I kept thinking, oh my goodness, parenting is always going to be demanding. And it's always going to be complex because we're dealing with human beings and personalities in different pieces. But I was just observing so many parents experiencing it as like sucking all the joy out of life.
Mm-hmm.
And I just kept thinking it didn't have to be that way. It didn't have to be that way. But I still wasn't like, okay, I'm going to stop the school year and I'm going to go and I'm going to go do this.
Yeah.
The stars kind of aligned in that I had had a particularly intense session with a parent. And then I walked to my box in the office, and every year the teachers get a neon pink form that says, do you want to return to your same position, your same school in a different position, a different school, or are you leaving? And I just stood in the middle of the swirl of the office, pushing me aside, and I'm holding this paper, and I'm just riveted to this paper. And it just all flashed in a moment. And I grabbed the nearest pen and I checked the I'm leaving box and I signed my name and I handed it to the office manager. It was like, here, take this. And I walked out of the room and I'm like,
Wow.
what have I just done? And I had already taken the first weekend. I got my coaches training was through Coaches Training Institute in San Rafael, and I had already done their first 3-day weekend. And this was the sign to me to go sign up for the rest of their weekends. And so I took, I think, 2 more before the end of the school year. And which meant I'd had to take, they were 3-day weekends. So I had to take a Friday off, which was a big deal because I'm not the kind of teacher who took days off.
Yeah.
And so that in itself felt like, you feel like, who's going to be judging me? Who's going to be looking at me? Like, who am I letting down? I mean, that brought up a whole host of feelings. But the school year ended, and then I had done it. I had given up my tenure teaching job.
Wild. I love that your description of holding that paper with the swirling office, like that feels like a movie scene to me. I can totally picture it. Wild, wild. And that whoever it was that you handed that slip to must have been like, wait, you checked the wrong.
Oh, she was too busy. She didn't look at it right away.
Oh,
I'm
that's
sure.
probably true. Yes, I'm sure that that's true. But like in the movie, that's what would have happened.
That's what would have happened in the movie. Yeah, exactly.
Because
But
it would have been about you because you would have been the main character.
I didn't ask my husband. I didn't even, I hadn't even really talked to him about this.
Wow.
I mean, over the previous years, I had kind of been doing my research, and it was more like when I was deciding no, that was more when I had kind of said to him, like, yeah, I kind of looked into that. I thought that wouldn't work, and da 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 da. And then, yeah, like, no, I didn't even ask. Like, are you okay with me giving up my steady income?
So how did that go at home?
Oh, I mean, he's
a whole other story.
He's an entrepreneur himself, and he's so okay, great. Like, you go do what you want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a Sagittarius. He's a freedom-loving Sagittarius. And so the idea that you would, first of all, the idea that you would work the same tenured job for 25 years, I think to him was the bigger mystery. And so
Yeah,
the idea
that
that
makes
you would
sense.
just say, okay, I'm going to go do this was much more in line with him.
Yeah.
But even when things have gotten tough, Tracy, and you know, there's nothing about classroom teaching and working in a school that teaches you anything about running a business yourself. Nothing. So there were no skills to transfer there. Coaches Training Institute at that time didn't do any of the business end of things. I'm not sure
Right.
if they've changed a little bit,
Yeah,
but
no.
they would have maybe 20-minute conversations at the end of a session about, how do you get clients? Not helpful. So I was really well trained as a coach, and obviously all of the experience that I had had already made that feel very natural and very easy. But yeah, business has been blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
All
Well,
the
I mean, the good thing about being a coach is that the coaching is what we signed on for. So when you get to help the people, everything starts to feel good again.
yes,
Of course,
yeah.
we've got to work through our challenges on the business side of thing, and they're always going to be there. But talk a little bit about, I know that you work with a lot of parents one-on-one, that you do webinars, that you do summits. You had one recently, all of those kinds of speaking to larger groups, but a lot of your work is one-on-one because every family and every situation is different. So talk a little bit about what someone could expect if they were to talk to you about helping them with their family situation.
Sure. Thank you for asking. We start with a getting to know you call, and that's really what it is. I don't do any coaching on that call. It's just an opportunity for you to paint the picture of what is parenting feeling like right now in your home, and what are you wanting it to be?
Mm-hmm.
And if I feel I can be of service, then I, ask parents permission to share how do I work with them. And if I don't feel I can be of service, I say, to me, it's sounding like this is the kind of professional you
Mm-hmm.
need. And if they are, somewhere in my circle and I can give them resources, I give them resources of a concrete nature. And if it's more, this is the kind of professional you need to be looking for, sometimes
Yeah.
that's
And so what came to my mind was, that because you're not a therapist, because you didn't do the MFT situation, a lot of times people will come to therapy when there's a problem versus what I'm hearing you say is maybe parents are saying, it's not great. And I'd like things to turn a corner in this direction. It's not like it's a problem, one problem necessarily, and maybe it is, but in a general sense, like it's just not going the way that I thought it would I would want it to go, or maybe it should go.
well, I do have to say my most favorite clients are my proactive ones.
Yeah.
And those are the people who are, I had a client who had a 16-month-old, and they realized they were coming up to the terrible twos, and they were thinking, you know, I mean, we used to say there's no manual. Unfortunately, there are way too many manuals now. And so
Right.
that's part of the overwhelm, right? Part of the overwhelm is that you sit down to answer a seemingly simple question and you get 18 different opinions that all seem to be expressed in language that says, if you don't do this, you're going to ruin your kid forever.
Mm.
And so instead of saying, oh, that's empowering because I have information, now I have more overwhelm
Um,
and to do it. And so the biggest part of coaching for me then is to get all the puzzle pieces on the table. That's a big part of it because families are unique and all the different personalities are unique. And then alongside that, I really want to know what are the values that parents are operating under. And that's where we begin to find a match, right? That's where we begin to say, I'm going to connect these values with these parenting approaches.
mhm.
So I don't put myself, I don't call myself a gentle parent, a conscious parent, even a positive parent, because I really want to start with the parents that I have in front of me and who they are and where they are
And what's
and
important to them.
what's important to them and
Yeah.
what's going to work for them. So most parents sign up for my 3-month coaching package. It's 10 sessions. Over those 10 sessions, we do a lot of immediate problem solving in the beginning. Well, we do values work first, then a lot of immediate, like where the throbbiest pain points. And then things usually begin to get better. And that's when we can begin to go deeper in what's your master plan? Well, who's the adult you're raising? Who do you want at 21?
Mhm.
What are the qualities and characteristics that you would like to have a boss brag to you about? We love, oh man, if I had 10 Rios, we would be off and running because these are the qualities that Ryu shows up with.
Mhm.
And then you back plan and you say, great, how am I for
Right.
training and nurturing and focusing on those qualities
Yeah.
as I raise my kids? So at the end of 10 weeks, I don't just want the immediate problems solved. I want you to have your master plan.
Yeah, I love that. And, I feel very fortunate that I found coaching when my kids were young, and it changed a lot of my thought processes in raising them, since I was a solo parent by then, to to know that ultimately the goal was to help them to thrive, right? It wasn't to help them succeed. It was to help them to thrive.
Yes.
And a lot of people don't have that perspective. I know I didn't have it before finding coaching for myself. And so I love the idea. Like, I can just keep imagining myself, had I never lost my husband, had I never been a coach, and being that kind of corporate queen that I was on the road to becoming, and thinking very differently than the way that I think today, and how that would have shaped the kids and how they grew up, and
Yeah.
experiences that I would have given them or not given them as a result, and everything. So if a parent is open to that without having the experience of having a coach, I hope that they can hear this and know that's the benefit, is the sitting down and like really thinking about what it is that you're trying to do, as opposed to the things that you have been told you should do, because it can be.
Yeah, and there's all the shoulds, that's a piece of it. And honestly, a big piece of it is just that a lot of times we're running around like chickens with our heads cut
Yep,
off, and we're parenting by the seat of our pants.
absolutely.
And that's
Without
understandable.
having that like strategy underneath it, you're just living day to day.
Yes, yes.
We
Please,
don't need 20 years of
please,
survival mode for these
please
kids.
help me get through bedtime. Please help me get to Friday. Please help me get to summer.
Yes.
And that's really too bad.
It's really unfortunate, and it doesn't, and that's the thing, is it doesn't have to be that way. People don't recognize that it can be different until something goes wrong, or maybe until they just all of a sudden have been opened up to a new way of thinking about it, and someone mentions the work that you do, or someone mentions how something has changed for them, and therefore they're like, oh, I never even thought that could be different. Let me
Yeah.
find that for myself. So it's
And
such a gift.
it's, I mean, it's an investment in time and money for sure. And yet it's like,
But it's our kids. It's
what
worth
doesn't
it.
get put on your gravestone, right? You are never going to say
I'm
that
sorry I spent
I shouldn't
time.
have, that time we spent with Elisabeth really wasn't worthwhile.
Right.
And I do have a really good guarantee. I say that if at the end of showing up for making the appointment, showing up for the appointment, doing the homework, at the end of 3 sessions, I'm not your person, you're not feeling it, I refund the whole package.
It's
And
very
the reason
generous.
that I
And
give that
yeah.
guarantee is because if it's not a good fit, you are not going to do the work.
Yep.
And if you're not doing the work, then you are not fulfilling my mission, which is to transform families and to bring peace to the world one family at a time. So I want to release you, and I want you to go find whoever your person is.
Yep.
In 10 years, it's been two people. And in both those cases, there was one spouse who was really heels dug in
Yeah.
about not wanting to do the work.
Yeah. Which makes total sense because, because it is, you have to be vulnerable as a parent to take the information and to take it not as criticism.
Yeah.
But as an opportunity for growth and support and all of the good things.
Yeah.
Well, my friend, I know that we could just keep talking for a whole other hour, but that just means we're going to have to do another episode sometime in the future because, what I really want parents to hear from hearing you today in this episode today is that there's hope, I guess would be one thing, but really it's I want the parents to know that they can create what they want with their family, but I also just want people to know, women who are listening, entrepreneurs to know, leaders, that taking the leap towards something that is what you're meant to be doing, even if you've been doing something different and it's been a long time, and it's how do you give up the income and this and how do you make the change, that making the change is worth it.
Yes.
Because even though you know how to be an entrepreneur, here you are 10 years later, still helping parents one family at a time.
That's right. And statistically, not that many new businesses last 10 years.
Absolutely.
Right. And so, it does. What it says is that even when things get rocky and get hard, then you have that coaching session, which lights you on fire and reminds you of the impact that you're having on the world and the difference that you're making in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what gets you back to, okay, it's fine. It's going to work itself out.
Yep. I love it. Well, I hope that if people are in a place where this is helpful to them and the work that you do is helpful to them, that they will reach out. We'll put all of your info and everything, of course, in the show notes. And I just want to thank you for your time today. It's always a gift to get to talk to you. I feel like my cup is all full today with your joyfulness. And I want to thank you for being on the podcast. I love you so much. We'll talk soon. Thank you for listening to the Bold and Brilliant podcast. I'm your host, Tracie Root, and I want to invite you to check out the show notes, find out where you can connect with our guests, find out more about what I and the Gather community have to offer you, and be sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platform. Thanks so much.